So you've purchased an Apple2Pi version 4.5, the latest 2017 edition, and you want to know how to get going quickly. First, we always highly recommend that you visit our support forums, download and read over the manual, as this is not your average plug-and-play board for the Apple II. What we have here in front of us, starting in the upper right, is the red Apple2Pi board. To the left of it is a Raspberry Pi board, sold separately, and the accessory pack, also sold separately. The accessory pack consists of a micro SD card written with our SD card image, a 5¼ disc pre-written with our Apple2Pi client software, a 90-degree HDMI adapter that we have customized for clearance, as well as a high-quality HDMI cable that we've also customized its end for clearance. If you didn't purchase this accessory pack number 1, you must go to the support forums and download both the 5¼ disc Apple2Pi client.po file and write it to a floppy disk. You could also use a virtual 5¼ drive as well, just as long as the Apple II is set to boot to that drive. You must also download the micro SD card image from the forum as well. This file must be written using a flashing software such as Etcher for the Windows platform, or if you're using a Mac, the Pi filler. Etcher is spelled E-T-C-H-E-R, and Pi filler is P-I, no E, filler. Once you've written and burned your images to the SD card, insert the micro SD card into your Raspberry Pi board. You will then need to assemble together the Raspberry Pi and the Apple2Pi, being extra mindful that you do not miss any holes when plugging them together, and attach your 90-degree HDMI adapter as well as the HDMI cable to the Raspberry Pi board. The Apple2Pi board is keyed only on 3 sides: the top, the bottom, and the right side. Not all 4 sides, and you can possibly be over by 1 row, leaving that row exposed. So be very careful, as you can end up breaking and frying up and setting on fire your Raspberry Pi, your Apple2Pi, any boards plugged into the Apple II, or even your Apple II itself, because this does short out your 5 volts to ground. Always double check to make sure it is over and it is plugged in correctly. Since it's plugged in correctly, we're then going to add the adapter and the cable. And this is what it should look like assembled. If you're ready with your floppy or virtual floppy to be booted, and it is loaded into your boot drive, it is now time to boot up the Apple II and get the client configured. Do not plug in the married boards just yet. If you're using an Apple II GS, here is what our control panel looks like in the slots section of the panel. You can see that slot 2 is selected to your card. That's where we're going to be plugging in the married boards. Make sure you set your control panel to where you're going to be plugging in your married boards to, and save it and exit out. Now we're booting up our Pi client for the first time. Upon first boot, the client, which is what is on your floppy disk, will need to be set up and set to the slot that you have your Apple2Pi plugged in. On the monitor, you're going to see that it's scanning for that Apple II-Pi board. The way you know it's scanning is that you see that spinning cursor on the top left. We will press any key to stop it from scanning and run the configuration program. The way we run the configuration program is that we type in run space config. Hit enter. And now the Apple II-Pi configuration utility is now running. It's going to ask to enter the slot, and that slot is the slot that we're entering our two married boards into. So in this example, we're using slot 2, so we're going to press 2 and we're going to press enter. It's now writing this information to the client. You can now also put on your Write Protect tab so that you don't overwrite this information. It will be set to now slot 2 until you physically go back in and run config once again. If you decide to change slots and you want to move the Pi to some other slot, you must remember to do this, or else it will never connect. Now that we have the client set for where we will be installing the married Pis, and the control panel is also set if you're using a 2GS as your host computer, it is now time to plug in the married Pis to the Apple II computer. We'll first need to power down the computer and insert the married Pis into the computer. We have now plugged in the married Pis into a ROM 1 2GS, and it sits very nicely in slot 2. When using our modified HDMI adapter and cable, there is no strain or awkwardness on the HDMI cable or any strain whatsoever on the Pi boards. We are now ready to power everything on. We will show you both what to expect from a cold boot on the Apple II-Pi monitor as well as the HDMI monitor. We'll then do another cold boot so you can see what will be on both screens, because both screens are actually next to each other here in our lab, so you'll get to see everything at the same time as well. Just a quick side note, not to confuse anyone. If this is your first time, as for the first initial boot, the image on the SD card will boot and then reboot quickly one time, and this is only the first ever time you boot and never again. This is because the Apple II-Pi software was written to adapt to your size of SD card, so it does a resize on that first initial boot. After that, it'll never happen again. The initial boot will resize that initial boot and never ever ever happen. You don't have to do anything, it does happen automatically. This has been booted up before, so we're not actually going to see that resize happen. But it happens very quickly, within about 5 seconds it's completed. So here's a cold boot. We're going to look at the Apple monitor first. And this is what you're going to expect if everything's connected properly. You hear the bell, and it says over here, Apple II-Pi connected, keyboard routed to Linux, Pi drives available. That means it's communicating properly. Also, your mouse, and if you happen to have a joystick, it's also now routed properly. Now we're going to do a cold boot and show you the HDMI monitor alone, and what to expect there. This is your HDMI monitor booting up. And now you see GSOS loading. It was pretty quick. I heard the ding. That means that it's all connected. I'm now going to move the mouse, and it is absolutely working perfectly. It is communicating properly. I'm using the actual Apple mouse. Now I'll do one more cold boot, and you'll watch both screens and see what it looks like, and then we will show you how to shut it down properly. On the left you have your Apple monitor. On your right you have your HDMI monitor. And this is what you're going to expect each and every time you boot up. It just connected. Now you're completely on your HDMI screen. Now to exit out after you've used GSOS and you're finished up and you're ready to close down, what you're going to do is you're going to want to press on your keyboard Option, Open Apple, and 4. Or Closed Apple, Open Apple, 4. When you press that, it's now going to break out of GSOS, and it's now going to load in your Linux GUI. Your keyboard and your mouse from your Apple is still going to be active and working. We're not going to get too much into this. We're just going to show you how to shut down properly. You go up to the top, you click your Raspberry, then you click shut down, and then you go over to here to shut down, and it's going to start shutting down. Always give it about 10 seconds from here, and that's a complete shutdown. Once those 10 seconds have expired, then you can power off your system. I want to thank everyone for purchasing the Apple2Pi, brought to you by Ultimate Apple II. And remember, it's either ultimate or it's not. Have fun, everyone. Thank you again.